Before we begin, here's how to earn continuing professional education credit for attending this session. Gain valuable insights by attending the podcast, then complete the assessment test to download your certificate. To do this, follow these simple steps. Click on the link in your description to access the session. Create a free account and attend the podcast. After the podcast, take the assessment test and download your certificate. It's easy, and it's free. We highly recommend checking out our subscription.
The thing that you're talking about, it's natural for even a global audience to get an attraction to it, because you see, when I started off, I was not in the United States, but I still had those, doubts which you have faced. So it's natural for you to have a global audience, and I pray it continues to reach. And now,
Just while we're on this, Saul, real quick, because your listeners may be curious about this. People say to me, Jerry, is the book like US centric? Is it just written for US accountants? My answer to that is largely not. Like, there's a couple chapters early on where I talk specifically about the CPA exam and what's involved, and that's mostly a US designation, although that's applicable in many other jurisdictions. But most of the book, and we'll get into this, I talk about things like communication skills, have a value creation mindset, the importance of relationships, embrace change, technology is your friend. These are broad concepts that apply to accountants all around the world. They're not limited to the US. So that may be useful for your listeners to know.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that brings up a very interesting point. Moving into the soft skills, Jerry, your emphasis on the significance of communication, empathy, and relationship building is striking. So, can you expand on why these skills are indispensable?
Sure. So during my career, I worked with a lot of very bright individuals. Many of them were also, hardworking, talented, very good accountants, right? But not all of them achieved success. And sometimes they weren't successful because they lacked some of these interpersonal skills, soft skills, empathy, some of the things you mentioned.
Welcome to another interesting episode of our podcast. I'm Saul, your host, and today we are privileged to have Jerry Maginnis with us. Jerry has over 4 decades of experience in the accounting profession and is the author of Advice for a Successful Career in the Accounting Profession: How to Make Your Assets Greatly Exceed Your Liabilities. Jerry, it's fantastic to have you here.
Yeah, well, thank you, Saul, and good to be with you today. Looking forward to our dialogue.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jerry, your book and extensive career has inspired many. What motivated you to share your insights through your book?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Saul. So I spent my career at KPMG as an audit partner for most of my time there, but I did, get into some leadership roles towards the end of my career. Spent the last 8 years as the managing partner of our Philadelphia office. So that's kind of my background for my career. I retired a few years ago from KPMG and have had the opportunity to stay active in the business world. I'm serving on some boards of some public companies. I'm chairing some audit committees. I'm doing a fair amount of consulting work in the profession. But probably the thing that I've most enjoyed during this phase of my life here in retirement has been the opportunity to get involved in an academic environment at a university called Rowan University. So I live in southern New Jersey, and Rowan is located about 15 minutes from my home. It's a public university and about 20,000 students, pretty good business school, pretty good accounting program. I got involved there, Saul, in a volunteer capacity. They call me an executive in residence. And I do a bunch of things. I chair their accounting advisory board. I give some guest lectures to the students, but mostly what I had a chance to do was interact extensively with the accounting students there and tried to be a resource to them, so they had a lot of questions about their career path and internships and should I go into audit, should I go into tax, should I go big four, local firm, industry, etc. And I tried to help them out. And I'm getting around to answering your question now. So after 3 years of doing that, it occurred to me one day that if these students at Rowan have all these questions, maybe there's an opportunity to try and put down on paper the answers, advice, counsel, tips, suggestions I'm sharing with them in a way that could be leveraged more broadly beyond just the students here at Rowan. So that was sort of the concept. As I got into writing the book, I did just that. I included a lot of information for students preparing for an accounting career. It also occurred to me there was a whole nother constituency, what I call early career professionals.
Yep.
And I sort of define that group as being in the first 3, 4, or 5 years of their career, that there
Yep.
was a lot of information that perhaps could be useful to them based on my experience. So I included a lot of material in the book for that group. And honestly, one of the nicer compliments I've had since the book came out is a lot of people further along in their career journey, even people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, have told me they found the book a helpful resource, a great refresher on some fundamental concepts that are important to success in the profession. So that's kind of the quick background on why I wrote the book.
Oh, that's fantastic. Very motivating itself. I guess you are answering a very critical, you're kind of resolving the dilemma of a lot of individuals. When I started off my career in the accounting industry, I myself was, because you don't know, you usually go with the flow. You just see where your friends are going and what everybody else is doing, and you tend to just go, and it takes you a while before you actually find out what you're really passionate about and where you want to go. So, I'm glad that you've written this book, and I'm surely going to get a hold of it. But,
Yeah, and just very quickly on that point, my hope in writing the book was to sort of present an overview of the profession, because I had many of those same questions and confusion. When I was a freshman, sophomore in college, what's this all about? And the book's intended really to answer those questions and arm students with information that will kind of accelerate the process of getting them into the career that's going to work best for them.
I agree. I agree. So let's delve deeper into the book that the beyond the initial motivation. Were there any specific experiences or lessons learned that you felt were crucial to share?
Yeah, it's interesting that you phrased the question that way. I should probably talk very briefly about the format of the book, because I think that sort of answers your question as well. So, because I was dealing regularly with college students and young professionals, I was very mindful of the fact that they, like us and pretty much everyone else in the world today, gets pretty much all our information from our mobile devices, right? And
Yes.
it tends to come in short snippets, a text message, a social media post. So young people today are not accustomed to reading lengthy, dense, thick books, 400 pages in length. So what I didn't want to do was write that kind of book that nobody would ever read. So I was
Uh-huh.
very sensitive to format. And basically, I tried to keep the book very concise, succinct, direct, and to the point. So the whole book's only 150 pages. The individual chapters tend to run 6, 8 pages. You can read a chapter in 10 minutes.
Uh-huh.
And then to really engage the reader and keep their interest, I break each chapter into 3 different sections.
Wow.
First section is right at the beginning. It's just 2, 3 sentences. I call it the key takeaway. Summarizes the whole chapter. That's kind of the text message, right? The headline. Then I go into a little bit of detailed discussion, but then I also wanted the book to be very practical and real world. So in each chapter, I share sort of a personal anecdote from my career, something that happened to me, I experienced that's related to what that chapter is about. Some of those things were good things, positive. Some of those were negative situations where I encountered adversity, obstacles, setbacks. Because again, every career is going to have some of those, right? And I wanted the young person reading that book to understand that. So those real world experiences I really share throughout the book. There's one of them in each chapter. I think there's 18 chapters in total. So there's a lot of war stories in there that are designed to help the reader or the reader sort of understand from a practical standpoint what this profession is all about. They get a lot of the theory
Yeah.
and the academic side of the profession in the classroom in college. I'm trying to give them the real world practical understanding of what goes on.
That's really interesting, especially the fact that you're also sharing your own experience, because that allows the reader to be able to put themselves in the place, and God forbid, if at all they've also been into something similar, they're able to relate to it and probably absorb that wisdom that you put into your book better. So very well thought out, kudos to you on that. Uh, and I'm always curious because this book has been out for quite a while. And when you're writing a book, you always anticipating it to reach the target audience because you're trying to solve a problem. You're trying to make the world a better place and everything. But then there are different kind of reactions that come when you have the when the book comes in. So like if you could tell me a little bit about how was the reaction of your book, how has your book's reaction influenced your perspective on the accounting profession and career development?
Yeah, no, that's an insightful question. And the book's been out about 2.5 years. It came out in the late fall of calendar 21. And I would say, Saul, it's getting a pretty good reception with three major constituencies. Of course, college and university accounting programs. It's really intended in part for those students. So those students like it. I've been doing a lot of speaking at colleges and universities. The faculty, many of them are using it as a tool in the classroom, assigning the book to their students to read. So that's one group. Another would be just what I call accounting organizations or associations. And as you know, there are many of them. So here in the United States, we have state CPA societies. I've been working with a lot of the state societies. Other organizations like Beta Alpha Psi, I've been involved with. I'm going to be speaking at the NABA conference in Las Vegas this spring. So a lot of different accounting organizations like the book. And, they're all concerned with the pipeline issue. There is some connectivity between pipeline and my book. I think my book could be a good resource to raise awareness about an accounting career and what it's all about with young people, including those at the high school level. But the last major group has been firms, really firms of all sizes, from the big four down to regional, local firms. I've been doing a lot of programs with organizations as part of their onboarding process with interns. They'll share a copy of the book and maybe ask me to speak to them. So I think overall it's done well. It's mostly been rolled out here in the United States, but I just saw some interesting information the other day where it's been purchased in over 20 countries around the world. So it's starting to spread through Europe and even Asia. And that's great. I mean, when I wrote the book, I wasn't motivated for it to be a money-making project. I was more focused on just trying to create a resource for this next generation. So I'm thrilled that, it's getting into the hands of a lot of young people.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, the thing that you're talking about, it's natural for even a global audience to get an attraction to it because you see, when I started off, I was not in the United States, but I still had those, doubts which you have faced. So it's natural for you to have a global audience, and I pray it continues to reach. And now,
Just while we're on this, Saul, real quick, because your listeners may be curious about this. People say to me, Jerry, is the book like US centric? Is it just written for US accountants? And my answer to that is largely not. Like, there's a couple chapters early on where I talk specifically about the CPA exam and what's involved, and that's mostly a US designation, although that's applicable in many other jurisdictions. But most of the book, and we'll get into this, I talk about things like communication skills, have a value creation mindset, the importance of relationships, embrace change, technology is your friend. These are broad concepts that apply to accountants all around the world. They're not limited to the US. So that may be useful for your listeners to know.
absolutely, absolutely. And that brings up a very interesting point. Moving into the soft skills, Jerry, your emphasis on the significance of communication, empathy, and relationship building is striking. So, can you expand on why these skills are indispensable?
Sure. So during my career, I worked with a lot of very bright individuals. Many of them were also, hardworking, talented, very good accountants, right? But not all of them achieved success. And sometimes they weren't successful because they lacked some of these interpersonal skills, soft skills, empathy, some of the things you mentioned.
Yeah.
Um, Accounting is a people business, right? You may have spreadsheets and the technology is improving all the time, AI, et cetera. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to communicate with people, interact with people, obtain information, cooperation. Sometimes you need to educate your clients or colleagues. So your ability to interact effectively with others is hugely important to your success. And with all due respect to my good friends in academia who do a wonderful job teaching the debits and credits and all the technical stuff, there's not enough time in the day for them to sort of focus on the soft skills as well. So
Yeah.
if you talk to many employers today, including accounting firms of all sizes, they'll tell you that their biggest concern about the young professionals that are coming into the firm is maybe their lack of soft skills. And this was magnified during the pandemic when people were sitting in front of a computer as opposed to being out interacting with others. So I think the book is incredibly important for those reasons because it can give someone that added skill set that they're going to need to be successful. Hopefully, they've worked hard in college, they've had a good accounting program, good professors, they've learned all the debits and credits. Now they need to put them into use in the real world, and that takes the soft skills.
No, absolutely. Soft skills impact career progression. I have heard that so many times, but I'm glad that, you have brought that out in your book. And, I would, you shared your examples in your book, but would it be possible for you to provide an example from your career where soft skills directly contributed to overcoming a professional challenge or something?
Yeah, sure. So I can recall a time when I was a manager on a relatively large and significant account for my firm. We had maybe 8 or 10 people working on the engagement. And it was my first year assigned to the client. So the first time I went out there, almost everybody on the team pulled me aside and said to me, "This one client official we deal with is really challenging. He's just a nasty guy. In fact, he's downright hostile. He's mean to us. It's hard to talk to him. He doesn't seem to like us." And I thought, well, gosh, maybe you're getting a little carried away. Can it really be that bad? So I went and met with this individual, spent about 45 minutes, came back and said, "You pretty much nailed it, right?" He is a hard guy to deal with. And he seemed to be angry, and upset with our firm. Um, so as I wrestled with that, I thought to myself, well, it's a big client, it's an important client. We're here to do a job. Somehow we need to figure out a way to work through this. So I called this gentleman. I said, "Hey, let's go off site and just have a cup of coffee and talk and get to know each other a little bit." And during that first meeting, so I mostly listened, and he mostly continued to complain and be nasty and was very hard to deal with. But as I listened to him talk, it became clear to me that he really, even though he was pretty senior in the client organization, he really didn't understand the purpose of an audit and what was involved in an audit.
Yeah.
So light bulb went off, and I thought, all right, here's a chance to educate a little bit. So I tried to slowly share some insights with him and round out his knowledge. And at the same time, as I listened to him, and I was mostly in listening mode, I realized like he actually had some good points, about some of the things we were doing as a firm maybe could be improved or done differently, or we could be working more collaboratively and efficiently with his colleagues. So it was that communication, that empathy, that listening that eventually brought that relationship around. And scroll forward 3 years later, I made partner. He was one of the first people to write me a congratulatory letter. We actually became good friends.
Oh, nice.
So in the accounting profession, as you know, you have to get along with all different types of people. And sometimes those soft skills can be essential to enable you to do that.
Do you want to earn CPE credit? Take this course of MyCPE 1 to earn free credit. Click the link in the description to get started.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially the fact that you mentioned that, if you're an accountant, there's no doubt, if somebody were to come and say that, there's something wrong or how do we account for this expense or everything, they would know it. But then there's this point wherein, like, I also run into that issue wherein sometimes I would want the accounting folks to explain this to me in layman's terms because I got to explain this to a client. And neither the client is doing the accounting, neither am I doing the accounting. He has his accountant and I have my accountant. And both of us are kind of like, we are the only ones talking. So we're like, I first thought that, I'll just let the accounting guy talk to their accounting guy. But then I guess it's just because of lack of that skill set, that they would be like, hey, we want this, get it to us. They don't want to communicate.
Yeah, you make a great point. It is so important to be able to articulate, explain why a position is the right position and why it's in the best long-term interest of the client. I've had many difficult conversations with clients over the years. Maybe we needed to book a significant adjustment that we're going to reduce their earnings. I've had clients where I had to give them going concern opinions, like all sorts of things. And your ability to communicate that in a professional yet empathetic way,
Yeah.
in a fashion that your client understands. And of course, sometimes they may get a little upset, but if you have a good relationship, you can do this, right? If you haven't invested the time to build a relationship, those communications can be a lot more challenging. But there's multiple dimensions. Some people just aren't good at explaining things in layman's terms. Again, another form of soft skills. And other people maybe have a way of delivering the message that is not very empathetic, right? So it's an art form, but if you're good at it, it can really be important because, of course, you want to get the right answer, do the right thing,
Yes.
but you also want to keep your client at the end of the day, if at all possible,
Yeah.
right? So you want to maintain that relationship.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I'm going to, like up the ante and move a little bit into a different angle, certainly also touching onto an element in your book, because
Sure.
today's environment, it's pretty fast paced, the work environment is very fast paced. So managing workload, avoiding burnout is critical. Everybody talks about it. And especially with the pandemic, everything going virtual, we're just seeing more and more instances of people just burn out and everything. What strategies have you found to be most effective? If you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. It's a great and important topic. I actually have two chapters in my book that kind of relate to this. One is called Work-Life Balance. The other is called How to Avoid Burnout. And I'll just talk a little bit about the work-life balance chapter. Now, accounting is a big, wonderful profession. We'll talk some more about different career paths perhaps later in the podcast. But depending on what part of the profession you're in, let's say you're an auditor and you're working through a busy season and you're serving publicly traded companies who have mandated, filing deadlines a certain number of days after year end, that seasonality comes into play, right? And there's going to be a crunch period.
Yep.
It's perhaps not as bad as some people suggest it is. In my experience, like the busy season in audit tended to run from around January 15th to March 15th, at least for our public company client base. Some of
Right.
the private companies will go into April and whatnot. But
Yeah.
during that period, you could easily be working 50, 60 hours a week or more. So part of this is for young professionals understanding that's not just your firm being mean, right? That's just the nature of the business, right? So they have to expect they're going to work a certain amount of overtime. But the firm has a responsibility to manage workloads in an effective manner that don't burn out their people. So I think, as with a lot of things, good communication is important. We
Absolutely.
used to have a meeting at the beginning of every engagement with my team, and we would talk. We would make sure everybody understood what the expectations were, but then we would also talk about their personal lives and commitments, and did they have something going on Tuesday nights? Maybe they like to play tennis. Well, maybe they could go home early Tuesday night, but somebody else was doing something Wednesday night. They would go home. So we kind of spread that around. But there's a lot of different ways to manage it. I think really important concept. Employees, young professionals are sometimes their own worst enemy.
Yeah.
They need to take ownership of their schedules, right? And they need to go home at 8 o'clock and not continue to work just because they feel like they're behind. Like, you're going to be more productive the next day, right? If you go home at a reasonable hour. So young professionals sometimes are their own worst enemies, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
Regarding burnout, Saul, it's important to realize that burnout is not unique to the accounting profession. Like, it impacts a lot of occupations or professions. Think police or firefighters or first responders. Think about medical professionals during the pandemic, doctors and nurses working long hours under stress, trying to save lives. So some common ingredients with burnout are long hours, pressure, stress. We have that in accounting for sure during the busy season. But I think a lot of people sort of let burnout happen to them as opposed to proactively employing strategies that will avoid them burning out. So in the chapter of my book on burnout, I talk a lot about things you can do to not burn out.
Uh-huh.
Number one is probably be aware of it, right? Number two is, some of it's common sense. Get your exercise, get your rest, have a hobby, have something other than the job, right? Even if you're working 10 hours a day, come home and do something fun for an hour, spend time with your family. Everybody's circumstances are unique, but you can't be working 24/7. That just contributes to burnout. So I try
Yeah.
and give a lot of those practical tips in the book.
Fantastic, fantastic. I clearly understand the importance of communication here, because I guess the challenge is, especially when you're in the busy season and the profession the way it is, sometimes some deadlines can just creep up just like that, even if it's not scheduled. And we all are human beings, we are social animals, and we have a family, a life outside our professional commitments. But what I've noticed is sometimes people find it difficult in communicating those personal commitments. They find it like a challenge because they're like, how should I say that, I know it's busy season, but I need to do this. So how do you recommend professionals to approach this in any profession?
Yeah, I mean, one piece of advice that I think is always good advice in just about any circumstances, be honest, right? Be open. So if you have a doctor's appointment Wednesday morning at 10 a.m., that's important. Don't just try and slip out and hope that you won't be noticed. Talk to your leaders the week before and say, hey, I have this really important doctor's appointment next Wednesday. Would you mind if I'm going for an hour, hour and a half? It's the rare leader that's going to say no. 30 years ago, that might have been a little harder to have that conversation, but the profession's come a long way. Firms are very sensitive to work-life balance, and their leaders, their partners, their managers are very aware of it. And firms are also smart, good business people, right? They spend a lot of money interviewing, hiring, onboarding young professionals. If those folks are walking out the door after 1 or 2 years, they're losing money on that investment. So even from a pure business standpoint, it makes sense to kind of promote good work-life balance initiatives. So firms have come a long way. But I think, again, the young person has to take some ownership and speak up and let people know. And of course, it has to be reasonable, right? You can't have a doctor's appointment every Wednesday morning at 10
Yeah.
o'clock.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's true. And, I guess somewhere you had also mentioned about the firms also taking the responsibility and them to be recognizing about these things. And from a firm, I guess the most important person where this should apply to would be the managers and the leaders, because they're the ones who face this. So, what would you tell to the leaders for how would the leaders be able to recognize and mitigate burnout in their teams? What advice would you give to the leaders for recognizing this?
Again, sometimes it's as simple as asking, right, Saul? So if you were working for me on an engagement, maybe we take a break, we go down and have a cup of coffee, and I just say, hey, Saul, how's it going? How you doing? How you holding up? Are you learning? Are you having any challenges? Are you feeling burnout? And I think taking 5 minutes to have that conversation can identify risk areas, right? Maybe there's 5 people on the team and 4 of them are doing just fine, but Saul's having some issues, right? So then maybe you can address those issues and work with Saul and help him overcome those issues. But if you don't know, if you just have your head down and you're not taking the time to ask or understand, then that's when the problems go undetected, they get worse, people do burn out, they leave, and you create this vicious cycle because somebody leaves. Now the 5-person team is down to 4. Everybody's got to work 20% more hours to get the job done, right? So yeah, being proactive, I think, is a good approach. And again, I believe firms have gotten a lot better at doing that.
No, I agree. I agree. In fact, I'll tell you an experience of mine. One of the prior companies that I worked with, this was not something like like a firm-wide practice, but my manager, he kind of like had this, he called it blitz. So let's have a blitz for 5 minutes. And that would randomly come in. Like, you got your communication channels and everything, and you just get this like a random message. Blitz for the next 5 minutes. So what have you got to do for the next 5 minutes? For the next 5 minutes, you got to shut down your PC, like lock it, get up from your place, go in the cafeteria or something, just talk or just chill or do anything. And it randomly comes, no matter how important that work may be, no matter how much difficult it may be, or whatever you may be into. It's like blitz for the next 5 minutes and you got to go. Sometimes, it takes a while to get a hang of it. Like I talk of it from the person who was doing the work and somebody would tell me to do this. I understand that there's a lot of work. I understand that it's client critical. I understand it's mission critical. It's valuable, everything. So initially, sometimes I would also get frustrated. Oh, come on, man! I'm right in the middle of tallying a balance sheet or something like that. But eventually, I realized the value of it because that 5-minute break which is not even scheduled. It's an unscheduled thing, but that allowed me to realize the value of it, because that 5 minutes that I'm out wherein I'm not talking about work, I'm just randomly. I mean, sometimes I could be probably ranting about it that, oh man, I'm just so sick and tired of this or whatever it may be. But it gave me that environment to openly express without bringing that judgments onto me, that is he not liking his work, or is he not, enjoying it or whatever, but it allowed me. And sometimes, it was really fruitful for me as well, because when I would express, some of the senior members would also be able to share their experiences that, hey, oh, maybe they had worked with a client in the past, or maybe they'd worked in something similar in the past. So what they would do is, they would tell me that, oh, yes, that happens. You know what I would recommend? Why don't you try this? Have you tried it this way? Or, this is how you should do it, or what's not, and everything. Or don't try to do it all in one go. And so it's really helpful, But
An
this,
added benefit from that is when you got back from that break, you were probably more productive, more engaged. You gave your mind that refresh period. I think another thing that is related to the soft skills we talked about earlier. Some people are really good at this, some people aren't. But something as simple as on a Monday morning, taking a little bit of time to ask your colleagues, how was your weekend?
yeah,
Did you do anything fun? Did you see the big game? Well, that weather was terrible. Just have some non-business conversation and do that periodically. I used to like to ask my colleagues about their families. If they were married and had kids, tell me about your kids. Like, how old now? What are they doing? What kind of activities? Maybe if they were a little older, they had grandkids, right? So everybody likes to talk about their families, and it's a great way to build relationships, which I know we'll also talk about as well later in the podcast.
absolutely, absolutely. And that brings me to a very interesting point, because eventually you may not be interacting with a client, but you will reach that point wherein you will be the point of contact for the client or something. And that's where things tend to get difficult, because the confusion that I would face is that, like, okay, I only got to talk about work, 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 work. Now, sometimes I would come across really friendly clients who would really ask me, what did you do over the weekend? And I would be like taken aback that, why does he want to know what I did over the weekend? Or am I even allowed to talk? And even if I was talking, I'm like, am I getting too carried away and all that? But then I realized that, it's necessary to have that, that understanding, understanding the client strategies and the industry insights, you need to have that. It's crucial because it helps you to build that relationship. So how do you advise professionals to enhance their business acumen and also to maintain that communication which is non-work related with the client?
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.
Yeah, couple different thoughts on that, and I was thinking as you were sharing your thoughts there that one of the little tricks I learned during my career is when you go into someone's office, take a minute to look around. Look at the things they have hanging on the wall. Something as silly as, what's on their coffee cup, right? Maybe it's their sports team, but you can learn a lot about an individual by looking at their work environment. And 9 times out of 10, if you say, hey, tell me about that picture, or what's this over here all about? Did you win an award? They love to talk about that, right? And
Yeah,
as they do, a couple things happen. You build rapport, you begin to develop a relationship, you learn about them, things that can be relevant and useful to the job itself. But you really develop that chemistry. So just taking the time to have that human interaction can be incredibly valuable, Saul. In terms of developing business acumen, I was a big believer in to be a good auditor in particular, you really need to understand your client's business.
yeah,
Not just the debits and credits and what the financial statements say, but how do they, if they're a manufacturing company, how do they make their product? I want to go down and see the plant floor. I want to talk to some of the production people and see what their challenges are and how they make the product. I want to talk to the sales and marketing team. How do you sell the product? I want to understand the economics of the business. How do they really make money? And if you do those things, the job becomes a lot more interesting. You're going to do a much more effective audit. You're going to understand where the risk areas are, and it's fun. So I call that being intellectually curious, right? And getting beyond just the spreadsheets and really understanding the business side of things. Um, Another really I fear it's becoming a lost art, but a great way to develop business knowledge and acumen is reading. Just be a voracious reader. Read the Wall Street Journal every day or some other business publication that's going to keep you current. Take some time if your client is in the chemical industry, get the industry publication and read about what's going on in the chemical industry. And then this is going to sound really crazy idea, like talk to your client. Ask them about the business. Just like when you ask them about their family, they like to talk about, they love to tell you about their business, right? And that's where you'll really develop some keen insights. But sadly, many young professionals in particular, and even more seasoned professionals, don't take the time to ask those simple questions, and they're missing a huge opportunity, in my opinion.
Well, what you just told me, I mean, like when you said Wall Street Journal, that was music to my ears because that's a practice that I've had, and I I couldn't agree more with what you said. You gotta keep on reading, and I mean, like, it's just a coincidence that you're telling me this. I just talked about this just like yesterday. I was talking about an article I read in Forbes, and I was discussing it with a colleague that this is something nothing related to work. It's got remotely no connection to what I do day in, day out. But it was a good conversation and it
Yeah.
helped me understand it. It created that connection just out of nowhere.
So
So
I have
it,
a chapter in my book called Developing and Enhancing Your Technical Skills. And I give a bunch of tips and advice in there. But one of the things I talk about is reading and the importance of reading. And I emphasize that there's a really strong correlation between reading and success. Successful people read
yeah.
voraciously, right? Bill Gates reads 50 books a year. Elon Musk, when asked, how did you learn how to build rockets? His answer was, I read books. Oprah Winfrey, avid reader. Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan Chase, biggest bank in the US, reads 6 newspapers before he goes to work every morning.
Wow.
High correlation between reading and success.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. I mean, like, I didn't know that, but thanks for sharing those insights. But
Sure.
yeah, so, when you started off, when you started off your career versus today, networking was a lot different back then than what it is today, right?
Right.
But networking early in one's career is often advised. Everybody says that you should start networking as soon as you get up. A lot of people think, oh, I'll just create a LinkedIn account and that would be done. But now there's a lot more than that. But effectively allocating time for it can be challenging. You can't just keep on sending requests to everybody and talking to everybody. So what guidance would you offer for networking? How do you network better in your career?
Yeah, such an important topic, Saul. And like some of the young students I met at Rowan, I think their view of networking is, hey, I need to go to the career fair and I need to go to this event, that event, because I need to meet people that could lead to me getting that internship or that job. But then they have a mindset like, okay, once I do that, I'm done. Now I got my job. I don't need to worry so much about it. I would argue networking is a lifelong skill set that you need to keep doing throughout your career, and it will benefit you throughout your career. Some people, look, we're all different. Some people are a little more extroverted, some people are a little more introverted. The common fallacy is, gosh, if I'm more introverted by nature, it's hard for me to network. It's going to be difficult. I don't feel comfortable. But it's like anything else in life, you have to just have the courage to do it. And I tell people that fall into that category, look, just go into a room, walk up, put out your hand. Saul, I'm Jerry Maginnis. Nice to meet you. And that other person will start talking and your work is done. Now all you have to do is listen, maybe interact a little bit. Next thing you know, another couple of people are there. So it's not as hard as people think. And it's just important in business in general. I worry, given the pandemic, like so many people have been working from home, that their opportunities to interact with others have been much more limited. And it's kind of like, if you don't use the muscle, right, use it or lose it. So people need to get out and about again. This is a little bit unrelated to your question, but a lot of employers are trying to get their folks back into the office. I
Yep.
tell young professionals all the time, like, hey, it's great if you want to work from home Monday and Friday, but try and get into the office at least 2, 3 days a week, because that's where the learning, the mentoring, the coaching goes on. And then other tips on networking, like, there's a lot of organizations. Pick one that's right for you. Maybe it's Toastmasters, where you develop these skills. Maybe it's your state CPA society. Maybe it's an industry association, but be part of a group that meets regularly because that'll keep those muscles sharp, right? You'll be using them and you'll develop relationships. Another important point is it's not all about just meeting new people and developing relationships. There's also an art to maintaining relationships. And I emphasize this in the book. Um, think about good friends you had in college or high school, that maybe you haven't seen or talked to in 10 or 12 years. And, life happens, we all get busy, but taking the time to stay in touch with people can be really important to your career success and kind of periodically looking through your contact directory and saying, gosh, I haven't talked to Saul in a while. Let me give him a call or let me drop him a note. That's an art form, but done well, it can serve you incredibly well over the course of a career.
Absolutely. Building professional relationships is indeed an art as much as a skill. And I agree to you on that. In fact,
Yeah.
I would love it if at all you could talk about a time when a professional relationship significantly impacted your career, if something like that has happened in the
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my anecdotes in the book, but I talk about an individual that worked for my firm who was a friend and colleague, actually worked for me on some client engagements, and then, as a lot of young professionals do, left to go to leave the firm to go into industry. And, I stayed in touch with him. We'd have lunch once in a while. We'd talk on the phone. He changed jobs a couple of times. I would ask him, how's it gone? And 20 years later, after he left the firm, he had advanced to the CFO of a fairly large company. And that company was in the process of going through an auditor change. And he called me up and he said, would you guys like to bid on this? And I said, sure. And we wound up winning, a very large, important client. So just maintaining that relationship over a 20-year period paid huge dividends. Now, I'm glad I did it, even if we never won that big new client, because he was a good guy and I liked him and it was fun staying in touch with him, right? So maintaining relationships is really important, but that's kind of a real world story along those lines.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you're also giving everybody a glimpse of how karma works. Do good unto others and it will come back to you. So
For sure. For
it is,
sure.
yeah. And you have been through these jobs, and today what I've noticed is, especially with the young professionals, they tend to keep on, just hopping from job to job and trying to find out what is the right career for them. Just choosing a right career is a significant decision, and people are just trying to figure it out. I'm sure your book has got some insights onto that. So if I were to ask you that, what are the considerations that you should keep into place while evaluating different career options, what would you say?
Yeah, great topic. I include a chapter of my book on career paths. Accounting is such a wonderful profession because everybody needs accountants, right? Like if you think of big global companies like Apple and Google, they have thousands of accountants all around the world, right? But what about in the little town you live in, that pizza shop or that dry cleaners on Main Street, right? Guess what? They need to keep a set of books because at a minimum, they have to file a tax return. They may have a loan from their bank. They might actually have to produce financial statements. They may not be big enough to employ an accountant, but they're probably working with a small accounting firm to help them with their books and their taxes, et cetera. So everybody has to keep accounting records. Large companies, small companies, nonprofits, governments, family businesses. So that applies to every industry out there, right? So let's say you really like the fashion or the retail industry or the sports and entertainment industry. You could go pursue your passion using your accounting degree to work for a company in that industry. Um, there are just so many different ways you can take your accounting degree. So public accounting, private industry, audit, tax, advisory, forensic accounting, internal audit. I mean, I could go on, but you get the idea. So part of what I'm trying to do in the book is just lay out that menu and at a very high level, make the reader aware of all the different things you can do with your degree. They can then think about like their personal interests. I met a young person one time, they were very passionate about the nonprofit world and helping others. So they wound up pursuing a career there. And there's a lot of great nonprofit organizations, some of which are big billion-dollar plus organizations. But I tell a story in the book about my friend John Nicholas. John started in public accounting, CPA, loves sports in general and baseball in particular. He wound up getting a job as the CFO of the Philadelphia Phillies, a job he loves. He goes to the ballpark every day. That's where his office is. He gets to be at all the games. So
Wow.
pursuing your passion is important. And you can do that in accounting in a major way.
Absolutely, absolutely. The world today has become such that, like if at all you wanted to do something, you would probably rely on some mentor or some advisor, and you'd probably like, hey, if somebody can just advise me on this or something, that would be great. And I always like to know from people who have been in that place. So, I look up to you to, ask that, I would want you to probably, tell me, for our users, what is the role of mentors and advisors and how important it is for helping people navigate into career decisions? How important is that?
Yeah, it's very important. And I think I talk about it in a part of the book where I'm advising college students about all the things they should do to prepare themselves for a career. So go to the career placement office, see what kind of resources they have, put together your resume, put together your LinkedIn profile, um, do a um, do a mock interview, right, to prepare for the real interview, get an internship, and then find a mentor is on that list. And when you're at that age, finding a young person who's maybe a couple years ahead of you, who's out in the world, that can be invaluable. But as your career goes on, you can have multiple mentors. And sometimes they're inside the company or firm you work with, sometimes they're outside the firm. It could be a family member, it could be a coach, it could be a neighbor or friend, but anybody who's going to take the time and interest to share their wisdom and experience with you can be a mentor. And young people should be eager to get that knowledge and advice because no matter how smart you are, Saul, it takes time to garner the experience, right? And that's what mentors can provide. Also, most people know this. There's a difference between a mentor and a sponsor, right? A sponsor is someone who will speak up for you when you're not in the room, right? And advocate for you. So there's different relationships that can be instrumental to your professional career. Mentoring hugely important. I also tell people, look, some point you're going to be the mentor, right? You need to help
Yeah.
that next generation that's coming behind you and share your knowledge and wisdom and experience with them. And I'll tell you, like personally, one of the most gratifying things about writing this book is, or having written this book, is I get to deal with a lot of young people that will reach out to me for advice or, hey, I had a question on this. And those conversations are enjoyable, rewarding, and make me feel good. So, being a mentor is not just helping others and diverting your time. It can also be very rewarding and satisfying.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, I didn't even remember, but it's kind of like, you're working, and then somebody just asked me an advice on something, that some new guy, because I'd been in the company, and somebody asked me something, and I was like, oh, you do this. That's okay. And then eventually I realized that he was, when he left the company, that's when he confessed to me that, I actually look up to you as a mentor. And I'm like, really? But it kind of like, when I sat down and thought about it, that's when I realized that, if somebody's putting you into that position and is looking up to you as a mentor, you come with that responsibility. And then started to give it a conscious thought. And if anybody came to me, I knew how I need to nurture and how I need to help and everybody. And I always say that when you're empowered, empower others. All right.
Yeah. And sometimes being a mentor, you have to deliver some tough messages. You have
Yes.
to tell people, here's where you're screwing up, right? Here's where you need to kind of correct what you're doing and maybe look at this a different way. So it can be sharing wisdom, but sometimes it can also be holding people accountable and pointing out things they need to get better at. And that feedback is so important. I talk a lot in the book about feedback and in busy, fast-paced organizations today, like my firm, we had a very robust performance management process. Beginning of the year, everyone sat down and documented their goals for the year, and that form was signed off by the employee and their supervisor, right? Then
Right.
6 months into the year, we had a mid-year review, and we'd say, how are we doing versus our goals? Do we need to make any course corrections? Again, that was all documented. The end of the year, we had a final review, compensation discussions. So a lot of paperwork, a lot of conversations. But, you know, if I'm not doing something well, Saul, I don't want to wait 6 months to find that out, right? I
Yeah.
know I want to know right away, right? So People should ask for feedback on a regular basis. Ask your colleagues, ask your supervisor, ask your client, how am I doing? What can I do better? And you're going to be able to course correct much more quickly. So I think a best practice is actually asking for feedback. And by the
Absolutely.
way,
Yeah.
when you ask for it and it's provided, you need to be willing to listen,
Feeling-
right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
not start arguing why I don't agree with you. That's
Yeah.
not helpful.
That's a very good point. I mean, like, thank you for bringing that out. Jerry, your insights today have been incredibly valuable. As we conclude, do you have any final thoughts or key takeaways for our listeners who are looking to build a successful career?
Yeah, well, I would again just thank you for the time. I've enjoyed the conversation. And people sometimes will say to me things like, well, Jerry, what's the most important piece of advice you give in the book? And I say, you have to look at the book because there's advice sprinkled throughout. You may not agree with all of it, but hopefully there'll be something in there that will be helpful to you. And that's really my goal. So is to help young people be successful and get some of those tidbits that are going to accelerate their career. If any of your listeners are interested, the book is available on Amazon. They can find it there. It's published by Wiley. There's a lot of reviews that have been written about the book. You can go on to Amazon and scroll those reviews. You'll get more of an idea of what it's all about. But again, appreciate the conversation and best of luck to all your listeners out there.
Thank you, Jerry. With this book, I'm pretty certain, a lot of people have asked you a lot of things. Any upcoming projects that you'd like to share?
It's funny. I just had a conversation the other day with my publisher, and they were talking about, is there another book down the line? And I think it's a little premature to make any predictions about that, but I've enjoyed writing the book. I never was an author or anything, so it was a great learning experience. And I think I'd like to do one more maybe down the line if that opportunity presents itself.
Well, looking forward to it. Thank you. Thank you, Jerry, for sharing your wisdom with us today. To our listeners, we hope this episode has equipped you with strategies and insights to enhance your professional journey, regardless of the industry you are in. Thank you for tuning into our podcast and stay tuned for more insightful discussions and topics shaping the future of various industries. Until then, keep striving and thriving. Cheers.
Access latest and trending CPE courses with my CPE One Unlimited Access subscription. Subscribe now.